yesterday really inspired me, and I think today as well. So that was just like my little history of what happened in the past 2.5 years with Iterations. And yeah, I'm just really happy that all of you are here and everyone online is watching. And I hope you have a great day. So I want to invite Shailoh Phillips to the stage, who will be our moderator today. This is Shailoh.
Hi. Good afternoon, everybody. All right. Thank you, Vera, for taking us back into the iterations of iterations.
Yeah, right. I like making that joke. I make it a bit too much, but
it's really funny. I think it's funny. I understand.
Yeah.
So I just want to give you a little framework for today of some questions to think about, of how to listen. And for that, we have a shared pad. Let's see if we can get a QR code up on the screen here. I'd like to introduce you to 2 images. The first image is the image of broadband, high-speed, fiber optic internet connectivity. Who has quick internet at home? Some people? Not me yet. We are like waiting for them to put the cables in the ground. But imagine that today we are like plugged into the mainframe. So this invites us to have two-way traffic, uploading, downloading, forking, modding, creating repositories. The pad that this link links to is open for anyone to take notes in, to look back into for references later. I do really highly recommend, if you can type and listen at the same time, to put some notes in there. I'm a chronic note taker myself, so you'll see all kinds of moderator notes flipping in there. But we think of this as a repository of our collective knowledge. A second image I'd like to give you to think with today is the image of a compost heap. So compost comes from gardening, right? Where you take the things that you no longer need to put them in a heap, and they decompose into very useful nutrients for new life to exist. And if you think like a compost heap today, when you listen to people's projects, it's not only, oh, they did a cool thing, but how can I use some of that knowledge maybe in a different way for my own projects, for my own practice, to really listen like a hacker, to listen like a gardener, to listen like a compost heap. Right? That's an invitation. And for this day, I'd like to focus on the question, what possibilities are opened up to us today? If other people can do this in their projects, what can we do, right? At the end of the day, we'll be taking an inventory of themes, what you heard. In preparing today and stalking people on the internet, because I never actually spoke to any of the speakers for today before, I really saw some common themes already emerging, which is looking at society as a source code that we can actually modify and change, very literally. Not only through digital code, but for understanding culture and language also as a form of code and programming. You could say, in some ways, today we are being programmed by their talks. We're getting some new downloads, some new ways of thinking. So if they can do this, what can we do? That's the question for today. And I put in the pad, there's a little basic question cheat sheet, which I think can be really helpful for us in formulating discussion points with each of the speakers. So there's the who question. Who are we talking to? Who do they work with? Are they working alone or in a collective? Who are they working for? Which communities are they involved in? What kind of practice do they have in this? There's the what question. What do people make? What tools do they use? There's the where question, which is always interesting in the digital age. Where is not only location, but also the infrastructure of networks. What platforms do you use? What publication circuits do you use? How do you share your work? Where does it go? And then there's the when, the duration, the iterations, the life cycle of your projects. How long do you work on things? Did one thing lead to the next, or is this one big practice that circulates back? I'll be looking at this for each person. There's the how, the methods, the techniques, the steps you take to make work. How do you make work? And last but certainly not least, there's the why. Why do you do what you do? Right? What are the values, the visions, the questions below this? We got some questions adopted from yesterday, which are also in the pad and here on the wall for those in the room. These questions are really interesting, looking at the history and the heritage of our field, looking at the future, looking at objects to think with, the values we're unpacking. So that conversation of yesterday continues today in the talks with new inspiration and new input. I warmly welcome those in the room here in Rotterdam, and those online, hi, and those in the future watching online, which might be us as well. So hello, future self. All right. I would invite you to take active notes and also to ask questions. After each block, there'll be about a half-an-hour presentation. I have prepared an endless sea of questions for each person, but I'm really curious about your questions. Also, if you're listening online, we will be paying attention to the chat. So feel free to pose your questions either here in the room or online, and we will try to address them in our conversations. Anything I'm forgetting? No.
No. No.
All right. Then I'd like to start with welcoming our first speaker, Nahuel Gerth, to the stage. Welcome. Can I get a warm applause for Nahuel? Who calls himself a creative technologist exploring the intersection of science, art, and technology. Some of my favorite things. What a combination. Designing and coding visual narratives driven by curiosity and experimental play. I stalked the Instagram. It looks very fun indeed, but playing with typography and different ways of working. And here's a quote for you. What fascinates me about code is that it represents the DNA of our modern world.
That's a good quote.
That is a good quote. It's you.
Yeah.
Yes. Our whole economy, the internet communications on the core level are all built upon code. And I quote, I see creative coding as an experimental way of accessing this basic layer. It allows us to dissect this strange material and reshape it into new forms. As artists and designers, we have the unique opportunity of dreaming up new forms of coexistence between society and technology. I'm very curious to see what you've been doing in this play. The floor is yours.
Thanks a lot for the kind introduction. Also, thank you, Vera, for organizing all of this, for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here and to be talking to you. Let's see if we can make this work. Cool. Okay, so I'm starting with some pantomime. Oh, I think we have to load this again. Starting with some pantomime action. Okay, so there was that. Yeah, so the topic for today is dreaming up new realities. I think it sounded like a nice title to me, and I want to talk a bit about how creative coding could serve as a transformative force. And yeah, so a few words about me. I'm Nahuel, hi. I currently live in Prague, although I'm originally from Germany. Most of the time I do things related to visual storytelling because I have a design in visual background in visual communication. I come from the field of design. I sort of stepped into the field of coding, like first slowly and then deeper and deeper, and somehow I ended up in this mix of design and code. Most of the things I do are web related, and like one of the passions I follow is science communication, because I really I try to shift my work field into this direction to help scientists to visualize what they're doing and to make it accessible to people who are not in the field. And this whole creative coding thing is like a side journey that's always like accompanying me. It's leading me to interesting places like here today. At the moment, it's some sort of personal playground, but yeah, it really drives also my work. And other things. Yeah, we also talked about this already, so I made a little infographic about this strange intersection of science, art, and tech. So I'm trying to be somehow there in this middle point and to explore what comes out of this connection of these fields. For today, we will talk about a few topics. First, I want to talk a little bit about code, because I mean, it's strange material, and so what's interesting about this, and how can we use it? How does this relate to the field of speculative design? What is creative coding? And then I will show you some explorations I made in the field, and I want to encourage you to dream in the end. Okay, so yeah, first of all, why is it interesting to think of code in the first place? And for me, it's really, we already heard this, but it's, I really think it's some sort of DNA in our current world. It's really a very basic core structure. It's governing so many things like technology, society. Many things are somehow, can be manipulated or accessed with code. So it's very a vital technology today. And I feel like it has become sort of a universal language. Like if we know like 1 or 2 coding languages, we can just talk to machines and tell them what we want them to do and make them do things. So it's really yeah, it's sort of a universal language that we can use. And yeah, so here are a few fields that are very that code somehow governs. I mean, all of the production chains. We have so many robots and automated processes, and they're all, of course, are structured by code. I mean, the whole global trade and economy, the scientific world, our infrastructure, like the electricity grid, the whole communication, of course, transport, healthcare, like all of these things. Of course, there are other technologies involved, but code is one of the fundamentals that is somehow structuring these or running these things. So I made up this little graph. I guess there's like lots of arguments against it, but for me it was a nice, mind model. Like in my simplified view, code is at the basis. It's somehow, governing technology. So it's telling technology basically what to do. And then, of course, technology is like one of the things that's really deciding how we live our lives, like how we interact. So at some point, code is really structuring also what we do as a society, and I think that's really interesting, at least for me. And of course, so why is it interesting for us? Because we can make use of this, of course. I mean, this part here, we're talking about creative coding. Of course, we can make use of this part, and ultimately, this is our entrance to changing society. So at least that's how I view it. Yeah, and this leads me to the wild field of speculative design. Maybe you heard something about that, but I will introduce you to it now. So on the left side, we see like what we traditionally would define as design. Like they call it in Dünn and F. Rabi, they call it affirmative design. And of course, design needs to solve problems. It needs to, provide answers. You want to design for production. Design is a solution. It's in the service of the industry. It's for how the world is. And like this is like the traditional approach that we take to graphic design, which is valid. I mean, this is totally nice. Nothing against it. But they propose the alternative model to this, which they call critical design or speculative design. And they made a nice comparison. Instead of solving problems, we try to find them. Or instead of providing answers, we want to ask questions. We want to design for debate instead of for production. We view design as a medium, not as the solution. And we design in the service of society and not in the service of industry. So I think this is a really useful thought concept. Of course, this doesn't mean that like critical design is better, or it's just a different way of approaching the whole thing. And there's also a really nice quote in the book. which says speculative design can give experts permission to let their imaginations flow freely. And like, I think this is a good quote because the goal is to use this speculative design thing as a practice, but to take it out of the design space, to get it into people working with economy, ecology, politics, science, whatever, and to help these people imagine solutions that they just didn't think were viable or possible. And that's what I like about this practice. Yeah, which leads us to the field of creative coding. That's why we are here today. There are so many different definitions on what creative coding is, so I just tried to summarize what I personally think is creative coding. And for me, it's really a method. It's an explorative method, and it allows us to playfully navigate and adapt to new technologies. So it's a way for us to understand what a certain technology does, to make it our own, and then to work with it. It's also, I view it as an experimental playground, where instead of playing around with sand, now code is our material, and it's code is becoming both tool and artistic device. So that's for me essential. And also, what's nice about this thing is it's constantly sending us on artistic journeys, and we have no idea where we end up. So it's completely uncertain if this will be productive at all. We have no idea what will be the outcome, and I think this means, in essence, that creative coding is basically applied speculative design. That's why I also talked about this earlier. Maybe you know this graphic. It's from Tim Rodenbrücker and Patrick Hübner. I think they created it really a while ago, but it's still very helpful to understand what creative coding is. And they call it the input-output model. And basically they're saying, there's lots of things we can use as inputs, as sources, as data, and we can translate them somehow magically through code and create some sort of output. And I think this graph that they made is very inspiring. For example, pick something you want. Okay, you have a keyboard on your computer. That's sort of hardware. That's our input. And the output will be, I don't know, graphics, a flexible visual system, some dynamic identity. So basically, any of the inputs you can use here, it could be a video file, it could be a text, it could be a piece of audio, and you can somehow translate them to an output. Like you can make physical things, you can 3D print stuff, you can generate music, you can generate texts. There are just so many different ways what you can do with creative coding. I think this it's about the approach. It's not about the end medium. It's not about what you put in. It's just the approach is, I think, what is creative coding. So I already said that creative coding is applied speculative design. All right, so let's have a look at a few things that I explored in the field, because it's always interesting if we go to the practical field. And one thing I stumbled upon recently is, I call it embodied typography, which is kind of using the body as our input source, and the output would be typography or letters, their shapes. And so I tried just many different things, how we can use our body to create letters. And it evolved out of the 36 Days of Type, which is like a yearly challenge where each day designers or people from many different fields make the same letter. And I took this as an opportunity to explore the field of body tracking and just to see what can I come up with. Is there another interaction that I can use on this day? What's possible with this technology? And it really helped me to enter this field and to just experiment and see what can be done with it. For example, you can pick stuff, you can use the positions of your fingers, you can transform elements this is something that maybe we used from Photoshop. We create some smart objects and masks, and we create some mock-ups and distort things. But I mean, it's much more fun if you can walk around your room and do the same thing, basically. Or I did a lot of things where I scaled objects, or for example here, I'm checking, which finger is touching which, and if finger 3 is touching, then give me this letter. If finger 2 is touching, give me this letter. And yeah, it becomes a sort of performance, so you can start, using your body, using your face, using your gestures, and create sort of a performance suddenly. It's a nice way of getting away from your desk, maybe. So how does it work? It's based on MediaPipe, which is like one of the many machine learning models that can track our body. And MediaPipe specifically detects like hand positions and body positions and face markers. And they made like a system, so each of these points has a number. And we can simply use basically these numbers and then track our stuff to it. So that's also what we did yesterday in the workshop together. So for this setup, there's a webcam. There's the tracking done with MediaPipe. And then the visuals are created with P5.js because like this is for me like some sort of safe zone, safe place. I know how to work with this. I can make stuff here. So the connection really made me or enabled me to play around with it and to to access it to my toolbox. Yeah, and this is all done in JavaScript. And I mean, so this was like kind of the start for the field, and then I thought, okay, this is nice. Suddenly the body becomes some sort of interface. Maybe there are more things I can do with it. So I started to talk to other people who work in the field or who work like in other fields, and try to find opportunities for collaboration, to integrate people from other fields and see what things they do. Let's see here. Yeah, for example, this is it's an experiment with Illustrator from Turkey, Ece, I'm not sure. And so she creates these very distinct handmade illustrations, and we decided, no, let's use some of these and track our body to it and just go crazy with the imagery, because the images themselves are also very body related, and so it made sense to find intersections to the body. I also made an exploration with Mayan Reiter. She's a body artist, so she knows how to use her body much better than I do. So I wanted to see, people who can intentionally use their body. What will they do? What will they come up with? Can they maybe embed it in some sort of dance or performance? Well, that time has passed. So it's basically the same technology, but I think dance is a really nice field, because there are suddenly again so many new things to explore, and that's something I definitely want to continue exploring. And basically we started. I sent her all my prototypes I made for the letters, and then she made something else with it, and then we slowly adapted these things and changed them. I think this was originally a letter G or something, and I mean that's a nice thing. I think even if you give people the same stuff, they will still create different things from it. So, I mean, it's really hard. I think it's really hard to copy something and not change it, because like everyone has a certain way they view the world, and it's always filtered through our lens. So that's also what I learned or what I liked from through these collaborations. And then there's the face painter. This is here. The face painter is in collaboration with Rodolfo Quintas. He's a Portuguese artist, and he has a really interesting approach, because he's working with elderly people, and like his idea was, people of a certain age, maybe with some sort of disabilities or something that's, whatever reason is somehow hindering them from communicating, whatever, or they don't maybe have access to technology, what will they do with these things? And so he made a whole workshop, I think a full month, where he invited also people from many fields, also AI artists and people with perfumes. And we just made the people test our stuff. And like, for example, this is Oscar. He was like one of the people who enjoyed it the most. And he made it to the Portuguese morning TV, so he was very, very happy about that. And this is something that, like, technology-wise, it's not complicated. We have 2 tracking points, and we draw ellipses. Like, drawing ellipses is one of the first things you do in P5.js, right? You draw ellipses on the screen. And it's basically the same thing. We have some colors going on. But, everything around, suddenly you have elderly people who usually wouldn't be exposed to these technologies. And just to see what they make of it was for me really interesting. And, just fun. And I love when these things happen. Okay. There's another field that I really enjoy is sound, because I also have like a background in music. I play drums, and I never found a connection to how this could relate to coding. So I tried to find intersections, and I will show you some experiments here. So this was a recent experiment where the opera singer, where it uses just a single source of sound, and if you move your mouse to the right, it's just the speed is a little bit increased, so it sounds higher, and the other way around, so it sounds slower. And I wanted to map this also to the body, so maybe if you have your hand and you can change the pitch, and the mouth maybe the volume. So I like these intersections. There's another series of experiments with pianos, or I don't know, MIDI pianos, whatever you would call them. It's the same principle. There's like one sound source, this strange water blower thing, and then the more you move to the left, it's deeper. If you go to the right, it's higher. So I liked how from one source you could create so many different outputs, and so that was fun about this series. I also turned this into a drum set. So you have like you have different drums. You have a kick drum, you have a snare, you have your toms, you have some cowbells. Every drum needs a cowbell. We have a clap, hi-hat. And then we have change in pitch. So we have, we can have high and low clap. We can have high and low bells, and you can just play around with it, go crazy. So I'd like to see how musicians maybe would use this, and so this would be another example that would be nice for collaboration, just to see what other people would come up with these things. So it was also a whole series of different sound experiments, and maybe they can also be expanded to the body field. So. And then something that's constantly also haunting me, because we are designers, so we have to work with grids, or we can work with grids, which is, grids are awesome. I like grids. In print, it's like, the grid provides the structure, gives hierarchy, enables us to come up with designs maybe faster, or to make consistency in the design. And so I wanted to see how these grids behave in an interactive environment, how we can use them maybe in more organic ways, or how they can be animated. And this is also like a field I'm constantly exploring. I mean, grids, they can be grids of objects as well. For example, here, it's like a repetition of elements, and each of the elements has basically like, it's the same element with different attributes. So the grid becomes some sort of maybe laboratory for different shapes to emerge. So that's also for me an interesting aspect of the grid. That is, it's a good way to visualize variety and maybe randomness, which is a really nice tool that we have as coders. This is something I actually developed out of the workshop with Vera. She gave a really nice online workshop on type and what to do with type. And there's, like in this case, there's a grid where you can draw on, and the drawing gets translated into some sort of isometric cubes. And it's also a thing that's constantly evolving. At the moment, it takes letters, and it takes GIFs and images, and you can draw. So there are many different ways that you can put stuff into it, and you always get this like abstracted isometric shapes in the end. Because we talked about the drawing, so I also tested a little drawing tool where we have, it's also based on the grid. We can scale the sizes and draw things, and things become animated, and also somehow also reminds me a little bit of this laboratory approach that things come to life and things emerge. And this is something that I would love to see calligraphers go crazy with. So I'm writing some people in the field and hope that they will maybe do something with it and show me, or maybe give some insight and knowledge what they expect, what they can do with these things. And for here I made a little demo for them, so you see, you can write letters with it, use it. And so I'm trying to convince some people, maybe one of you, who has a little bit more expertise than I in calligraphy, to explore this tool and maybe come up with new ideas what to do with it. So this already leads me to sort of the conclusion, because what's the whole point of this thing? And for me personally, the whole point is that we are able to dream up new things. I think what we can do is we can really explore new frontiers through the lens of creative coding, because like I said, it's a versatile tool. It allows us to access this code layer, and there are so many things we can do with code. I mean, code is a tool for molding reality. We can 3D print plastics. We can use CNC machines to create metal and wood artifacts. We can even access our infrastructure. I don't know, maybe send some satellites to space. Asteroid mining. Maybe some artists do that and do their own stuff instead of corporations. We can access the power grid. For example, there are people using a blockchain to find smarter ways how to divide energy between households. We can steer smart objects. There are these general purpose robots developed by Boston Dynamics or by Sanctuary AI that are, usually we have these single purpose robots that are set up for one specific thing, and the general purpose robots, they are kind of more variable like us, so they can do different things. We can manipulate sound and language. We can start talking to animals, like maybe this project from Neuralink, Elon Musk is behind it, so controversial topic. But I mean, they created some sort of implant which allowed a chimpanzee to play Pong mentally without having to touch it. So it's for me, it's crazy. So I mean, this whole field of biotechnology and genetics is also accessible through code. There are people like Neri Oxman who try to create interfaces between humans and nature, and I think this is an exciting field, and I'm really curious to see where this leads. We can print organic materials. Ultimately, maybe we can recode humans. Not sure if that's a good idea, but I mean, it's not off the table, so we should think about it. yeah, and at this point, every presentation needs Marshall McLuhan, of course. So there's a really nice quote, we shape our tools, and thereafter our tools shape us. So I think that's always good to keep in mind that we can create all these crazy things, and they will reflect on us. So, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't, or that we should be afraid of creating things, but I think it means that it gives us also freedom, because there are so many tools that we use which force us into certain ways, like we are designers, so maybe we use Adobe, and Illustrator is made for a specific reason. But if you create your own tools, then you can define what's the reason, what's the purpose of this tool, and this, of course, changes things. And this is what I tried to say in the beginning. I think we have the power of using this code area, and I think this is our entrance gate to really changing things and to ultimately change society for the better or the worse. Depends on us. But that's a nice typo I saw here. So yeah, to come back to the beginning, I think code is a universal machine language, but we as creators, we can exploit this, and we can use it to really dream up new forms of reality, and that's why we can use it as a transformative force. And I think our task is really to dream up these new forms of coexistence between society and technology. Because if we don't do it, then we just have the corporate visions, or we have people from politicians who think things are good or bad. Maybe as a last thought to end this, if you say these kinds of things, then of course many people say you're very naive. You think technology can change everything, and you're too optimistic. Or what's the alternative? Is it pessimism? But for me personally, I think we're kind of stuck between these dystopies that we receive from media. There's so many dystopic movies. Okay, what could go wrong? How could AI, enslave us? How will we end up in a surveillance state? And then on the other side, we have these strange commercial utopias. Okay, use whatever technology, become happy, become more productive, and we make life easier, we make everything great. And where are the optimist visions? I think we have to develop them. So I think that's why we need this naivety, maybe. And I think ultimately it's easier to destroy things than to build things. And this is why I think creating optimist vision it's much tougher than dystopias, because dystopia is, okay, we have AI, what's the worst thing? Okay, AI can kill us. Okay, there's my dystopia. But if you want to create an optimist vision, okay, we have AI, how can it really do something useful for us? That's much more difficult. So I think it requires creativity, and it requires activeness, and these are useful things, and that's, I think, why we should keep on doing this. And ultimately, it leads us to constructive approaches instead of passivity. Special thanks, Katja Rempe and Alistair. They're both crazy people who also explore these coding embodied areas, and basically they helped me a lot to develop these things, and so I want to mention them because they're great people. That's it. Thank you very much for your attention, and
Thank you so much for your contribution here, and for introducing us to a bit of a tech constructivist framework.
That's a good sentence.
So come into the light a little bit so we can see you. Do feel free, if you have at any point questions, to raise your hand here. And I'm going to also keep my eye on the question section of speaker 1. So if there are any questions, they can be pasted right in there, and I will go in. You have a first question already. I'm going to give you the mic.
Yes, hi. I'm Max.
Hi.
I was here yesterday, and actually I have followed you on Instagram for a year, and oh my God, I'm so happy that I saw you here from yesterday. So my question is for you, and I really need your answer. Actually, is is the question that I already asked yesterday, but I also want to hear your insight on that. So can I ask, how did you start learning creative coding? And do you have any advice for people who are like just start learning creative coding? And for now, my background is I had a crash course at school about coding stuff. Like they have a like quick introduction about HTML, CSS, something like that. And actually, I would say I have a very basic knowledge about like coding in general. So how would you recommend people to do if they want to follow the path that you are now doing?
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. So how did you get where you are at? That's
yeah, maybe I start with that. So, like I already said, I have like a traditional design background. So I learned visual communication. I did bachelor studies, master studies, and like we had some things like some HTML course. So we actually had a processing course by a teacher who kind of self-taught himself what is this strange processing thing. But yeah, I during my studies I didn't really do anything with it. Afterwards, a professor approached me and said, "Can you do a processing course for our students?" I said, "Yeah, okay." So I have to learn it first. And that's
so you learn by teaching. That's lesson one.
Yeah, that's a good point. You learn by
Very
teaching.
Very good technique. Yeah. I can second that one. Yes.
And then also because yeah, I mean I haven't talked about my commercial work, but most of it is web design, programming, and web design. And I didn't really plan that to happen, but just I wanted to work as a freelancer, and everyone said, "Can you make a website?" Yeah, okay, I can make a website. So I had to learn, you know, WordPress, or okay, I cannot do everything with WordPress. What's CSS? What's HTML? Can I use other systems, maybe Kirby or PHP, all these things? And so I gradually transitioned into the whole coding field, and then rediscovered processing through P5.js. And actually learned JavaScript through P5.js. So like the whole creative coding thing.
Would you say P5.js is a good starting point for people? Because there's a lot of documentation, of course, online.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, processing was made for visual people. It was made for designers who want to explore code. So I think that's a very good starting point. There are many resources. I mentioned Tim.
All you need is a browser, so you don't really have to install anything. So that's helpful.
Yeah, if you use processing, you have to install it. If you use P5, you only need the browser. P5 maybe is a bit more, at the beginning, strange because you already have some HTML and CSS going on. If you use processing, it's very like a safe space. But I mean, P5 opens the whole web to you, which is amazing. So I think my advice, to return to that, is I always start with curiosity. So what interests me? Do I see something from a person that inspires me that I want to recreate? And then maybe I ask them, you know, what do you use for this? What library? What language? How is this built? And then start with that, and you know, see where it leads you. Just try some things. If it doesn't work, do something else. But yeah, I think just constantly searching and testing and, you know, building small prototypes and changing little things. That's a good way to start. So I hope this helps you.
Thank you. So in your presentation, you really made an argument for coding as a way to actually influence society. Mm-hmm. What I didn't hear that I'm really curious about is, what about society would you like to change? In other words, if you are dreaming, because you said, yeah, it could be good or evil, and you know, it really depends who's doing it and what your vision is. So if it's up to you, what do you think is really important now to work on to change?
Yeah. I mean, I don't really want to change existing things. That's not my approach. It's more like, I think we are forced to find solutions because there are just new things coming. There's like AI is coming, and all these, like we talked about bioengineering. There's just so many things coming that we cannot escape from, and we have to find ways how we can integrate this to society and make use of it, like in an ethical framework. And like I think if we don't explore these things, then others will make the decisions for us. There are lots of companies, they have interests, and
so for you, it's really about this democratic, like that people have a say in what is being made.
to have a say. Yeah, so coding kind of enables you to have a say, but also, I think just to showcase alternative, just to show the possibilities, because we just need to explore. Okay, how can we actually use AI in different ways? Maybe not just as, I don't know, like chatbots or something. Are there different ways how we can use it? And I think if we have really lots of creative people and they explore these fields, then some of them will have like really nice answers. And I think we just need to show the variety of options and not think, okay, it's either that or that. So
it's like showing many paths at the same time. Yeah. Now, the work you're doing reminds me of a really bad April Fool's joke from 2011. Okay. There's a link, I promise. So every year, for a couple of years ago, Google would have these April Fool's jokes, and one from 2011, that's 12 years ago, was called Gmail Motion, where you could open your email, stand in front of your computer, your webcam, and go like, open email. And then you say, reply all. Things like this. So these gestures, back 12 years ago, that was a joke. It's not a joke anymore. No. What I see you're doing actually is this. So it's been a fantasy for a long time that we can use our bodies to interact with computers instead of, well, first only text on like a terminal type interface, and then a graphical user interface, a GUI, and now our actual bodies and intuitive. How do you see this development as using our body as a tool for interacting with code?
Do you have an urgent comment to that, or?
There's a setting in Mac where you can move the cursor with your head and click with your tongue. So you can like a frog.
Okay, this is I didn't know that. That's cool. So you can.
That sounds awesome.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. I mean, the field of embodied interaction exists already quite a while, but I think now what's changing is that through these web technologies, it's suddenly much easier. It becomes more present. And so that's also why I came to explore it. And I mean, I personally love working with my computer. I enjoy it. But I mean, it's just, this static motion of sitting there and typing. And it's a bit, limiting. And I think if we just manage to use our body as an interface, because I mean, we can use our body in many versatile, different ways. We can make all sorts of movement and gestures, and like it's very articulate. Our body language is very articulate. Maybe not so much in our current society anymore, but I mean the body itself is very expressive. There are so many things we can do within it. And I think if we use this as a translation towards machines, it's much more effective than just keyboard with 30, however many letters. Yeah. So I think that's interesting.
And one thing that struck me is that in the example you gave of some of the work you're doing with typography, you're using proprietary tools. Mm-hmm. So they're not open source tools only. So things that, if I understand correctly, the example of the media pipe is it's a Google software, right?
Yeah.
What are the considerations for you for, let's say, perhaps more difficult to use but open source versus proprietary software from big tech companies? And how do you navigate that conundrum when it's a creative coder of what tools you use and how they shape us as well, what you're contributing to?
I'm actually not sure if MediaPipe is open source or not. I mean, at least they make it accessible and public, so I think in that sense it's...
But it is a Google Suite tool, right?
I'm not sure how it works exactly. I'm just using it. But my approach to this is, I mean, I get the whole open source thing and making things accessible, but for me, it's more important just to test the technology. In the end, it doesn't matter if it's MediaPipe or if it's ML5, which I think is open source. It's more I really want to know what it can do and how I can use it. But I mean, I get the point. But it hasn't been so big of a consideration as it maybe should have.
I'm curious. I mean, especially because, as you say, we are shaped by the tools we use.
Yeah.
Right. And there's it's always a big question of usability. I mean, there's also something to say for easyware, that you use the tools that are as easy as possible to use because of accessibility, just becoming aware of the infrastructure behind them. And then what really struck me is your collaborations. When you're working with something, you're like, okay, who else can I work with for this? Musicians, people. Are these people you know already, or for projects, is it a way to get to know people? How do you approach your cloud of people you're working with?
Yeah, it's what you said. Like it's a way of approaching people, because like I personally, I'm inspired by many people, because I think or I try to use try to have like a sponge mentality, where I just soak everything in and at some point squeeze it out and then get something. That's like my approach. And of course, like if I'm influenced by these people, why not just ask them? And usually, what I really learned from these things is that okay, I have some ideas how I can use these tools, but I mean, people with different backgrounds, with different disciplines, they just have completely different approaches, and that's just fascinating to me. And I just want to see how. It's also the whole body tracking thing. In the beginning, everyone asked, "Can you send me your code?" And so I'm not sure. But then I said, "Okay, just make it public. There's a GitHub repo. You can copy it. You can use it." Because ultimately, I mean, I didn't even create the tracking. It's done by Google.
So you do work open source yourself in your own, or mainly?
Yeah, partly. I mean, it's also a question of taking the time to clean up things, and to make them easy to understand and then make them public. But I try to make it accessible because ultimately I really want to see what others do with it. I'm very curious myself, and I want to see these things. So why not give it to them and ask them? Well, yeah. I think that's the.
Thank you. And I think this comes back to your first question too. If you want to learn creative coding, a great way is to collaborate as well.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Right, right. So you learn things yourself. You remain inspiring, and somebody else can do something that maybe you can't.
Yeah.
It's time for a break, unless there's one last urgent question. Yes. Quick question.
Talk about like MediaPipe and also like ML5JS. Why did you choose like MediaPipe and not ML5JS?
Yeah. So this is a question for why MediaPipe and not other software. Yeah.
Okay, so technical question. First of all, ML5 is much simpler. It's much easier to implement, and I think to learn, I think I would also maybe recommend it. But it's just in comparison, the MediaPipe is so much quicker. It's more accurate. It's more precise. You can work in dark environments. It's just very efficient, and also it's not only doing body recognition. It's also doing like you can detect objects. You can analyze voices. You can find out bird species by inputting their sound. So it's just for me it was mind blowing what it can do. So I just wanted to try it, and I discovered ML5 later. So I saw that it has some similar capabilities. It's easier, but I just wanted the full toolbox.
Yeah, and I love the way when you approach each new tool with such curiosity in your own way, to play it, try it out, take it for a test drive, invite other people to play with you. Yeah. That's a really great way.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the approach. Like most of the things I showed you is not sophisticated code, like any programmer would, I don't know, get a stroke when they see the source code. But I really try to make a very simple experiment, very simple prototype to see, okay, does it work? Can I do something with it? Maybe make some variations, iterations, and then move on to the next thing. And then try something else. And then maybe at some point I come back and say, okay, this was nice, can I change it? Or in a new context, reuse it. But because creative coding is for me, it's a fun exploration. I keep focusing on the small prototypes and then move on in different directions. And, yeah,
all right.
That's a good question.
Thank you. Our next thing is actually a break. So I'm going to ask you to ask your questions in the break. We'll be back here in about 12 minutes. All right, get a drink, get some fresh air, and come back. And we'll be reconvening at 3.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to ask people here in the space to make their way back to their seats. Please make your way back to your seats. We're going to be starting in just about 2 minutes. All right, welcome back. Welcome to those here live in Rotterdam. Welcome to those on the live stream. Welcome to people of the future watching us on the internets. For those who haven't gotten that yet, I'd like to point you to a link to a shared pad with notes. You can just paste it in the chat of the live stream, and also for those here on the screen. If you'd like to hear more about the speakers, follow along with notes, and share your notes, I do invite you to collaborate in the pad. There are a bunch of questions at the beginning: who, what, where, why, when, how, and why, which is the framework of today. We're looking at composting people's practices, understanding what it means for us, and engaging as a community. I like to imagine ourselves as a collective body of creative coders who are learning from each other along the way, sharing knowledge, sharing ideas, sharing projects. What I always have when I hear interesting projects, I think, if that's possible, what else is possible? So at the end of the day, we'll be trying to make an inventory of the themes and the issues and the ideas that have come up today. So I invite you to listen actively with this framework in mind: harvesting, composting, the practices we find. It is my true delight now to introduce you to the work of our second speaker, Kelli Anderson, who I've been a fan of for a while, to be honest, but I've never actually spoken to in person. Kelli uses what we call design magic, I love this term, to connect people with the depth and possibility of their world. This includes digital work and paper pop-ups and models, really working with quite complex systems thinking into printed matter, material matter, physical matter, working between code, publishing, and animation, including rise of animation. She created this book, Is a Camera, which is a camera book, which transforms into a working camera. This book is a planetarium, which indeed is a planetarium, which have sold more than 100,000 copies. I tell you, in publishing land, that's quite a feat. Yay! Yes. So other projects are a viral paper record player, yes, and with a Yes Man, a utopian counterfeited New York Times, which won the Ars Electronica Prize. Doctors Without Borders have used the award-winning Tiny Bob Human Body app to communicate illness and treatment non-verbally to their patients. So her work really also translates into the medical field, for example. And there's a long list of clients and expo places that I do encourage you to look up. But here we have Kelli Anderson live from New York, is that right?
That's right.
All right, welcome. All right. You have about a half an hour. We will be following you here, and I have some questions for you at the end. For those listening here and online, I do encourage you to add your questions to the pad. I will be your embodied voice to pose these questions at the end. Kelli, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. All right, let me share my entire screen. That's great. Can you all see my presentation now? Okay, let me, here we go. Great. So yeah, thank you so much for that very generous introduction. And oh yes, you can see my screen. That's fantastic. Yeah, so I I just went through and removed like 100 slides from this talk because it got so long. But I hope that you find this topic as interesting as I do and can apply my strategies to your own work and explore the physical and the digital world in tandem. So I'm talking today a lot about jumping back and forth between analog processes and digital processes, computational processes, and materials processes. Robin Sloan coined a term for this called the flip-flop, the process of pushing a work of art or craft from the physical world to the digital world and back. And I found that in my own work, when I can do this successfully, that I'm able to achieve effects that aren't possible in one or the other space alone. And oftentimes new possibilities that are less easy or obvious to predict. So this is a blobby animation that I made with open frameworks that I then printed out on the Rezo and scanned back in. And then the result is this like very like grainy, tactile, idiosyncratic animation. So it's going to take you through a couple examples of this in my work. So yeah, I work a lot in code, but also in print materials and publishing and books. I'm completely obsessed lately with doing these like risograph animations that you're seeing here. But yeah, I tend to read Nature a lot, a lot of scientific journals, and then think about how those ideas might be like sort of transferred over into like a design space. Yeah, so all of these projects have some element of like coding and computation involved, but then also like come back to this like very like tactile space. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about like why I feel like that's important. This one says, make it happen. Yeah, so this is, for example, an animation that I created on the computer, but then wanted to try to figure out if I could animate a puddle. So this is based on Muir Bridges' like running horse. And the way that this works is that I created my frames on the computer, then cut them out using a vinyl cutter and put those vinyl stickers on 24 different sheets of glass as my frames. Then I could put this hydrophobic coating, in the US it's called Rain-X, which basically like keeps any liquid on the plate like in the set zone. And so the result is like, this is a strawberry Fanta A that kind of like scoots back and forth. So yeah, I'm really interested in tech, but not for like tech's sake. So I think the part of tech I'm really interested in is I'm interested in new possibilities. And for me, I find that like most of the moving experiences I've had with art and design work on this very visceral level. So I tend to take things back into the sensory realm, back into the realm of experience. I started my career as a traditional graphic designer, doing a lot of branding and menus, and I still do these kinds of things. I'm working on a branding project right now. But I started doing like a ton of infographics and data visualization work. And this work tends to take things that are, abstractions or numbers, and bring them like out of the realm of like pure abstraction, like into this realm where you can like see, feel, compare, otherwise like visualize, these abstractions. So bringing them into more tactile realm. So that's kind of like one part of the duality that led me to where I am today. And the other part of my work's duality is that, as little objects that seem like magic but have no hidden parts. So, there's a whole lot of lo-fi magic out there that exists in the world that, is kind of a novelty. You see it once, you realize it's a trick, and then you're never fooled again. So this is my this is my cat being tricked by this wolf. This happened once, and then she's like, oh yeah, it's not real. But, as a designer, I feel like there's an opportunity in these things that we oftentimes dismiss as novelty. So, whenever you see anything that's like magic, that occurs when there's a blind spot in your understanding of how the world works. And so a lot of things that happen like with tech magic, a lot of things that happen with like visual illusions occur because we're not aware of how our own perceptual systems work. And so as a graphic designer who's used to working in this mode where I'm explaining a lot of these things that people can't otherwise see, it really seemed like an opportunity to, catch people at that like wow moment and like deepen their understanding of both themselves and their world while they're interacting with it. So this is a little phenomenon called moire magnification, and it happens when you have a screen with little holes in it that occur at the same period as the dots that are printed underneath. And it's not like a glitch in the material per se or something that's engineered. It's kind of like a glitch in our own perception. The reason why it looks like these dots are getting bigger and smaller is because the screen is very selectively like showing and hiding the dots. And our brains are these, vast pattern finding machines that we always want to fill in the blanks. And so, the same aspect of yourself that allows you to like read a sign that's partially obscured when you're driving by gets your brain to think like, oh, the dots must be moving. They must be getting bigger and bigger, even though they're totally not. It's an illusion. I've been trying, and hopefully this next year is the year that I do this. This doesn't just work with dots, but it also works with tiny numbers. And I've really been wanting to make a clock where time is like coming and going. So hopefully that'll come out next year. But yeah, sort of, the thing I realized with data visualization is, very well summed up in this shape called a Mobius strip. And hopefully some of you all have made them. If you haven't, do yourself a favor when you get home, or just grab something right now. You can take a strip of paper, you can twist it once, and you can tape the ends together. And what you've made is, very, very simple, all paper mechanism for changing a two-sided surface into a one-sided surface. And so you can test and see that it's a one-sided surface by drawing a line down the middle of it, and it will end in the exact same place where it began. And this, like many, many things, it's something that's like a lot easier to understand in paper than it is on paper. So this is what the Wikipedia article looks like explaining why this phenomenon works. And I think you need an advanced degree in math to even get through the beginning of it, which is ironic because usually like Wikipedia is the most pedestrian entry point to any body of information. So, I, realized that, this is an interface. It doesn't look like an interface. It's not normally like what we'd consider an interface. Normally when you talk about interfaces, we're talking about computer to human interaction. But this allows my hands to like feel out and understand something that like my mind would need 4 years of math education to be able to get through. And so I realized that this is the exact same thing that I was doing as in data visualization, but just in a different form, that, you can take paper and it can almost be like an interface on like these realms of the unknown or things that are difficult to experience firsthand, unaided with the human eye. You can use paper to enfold it into a paper airplane shape and like learn things about like air pressure and air currents and things that are difficult to see with like the naked eye. You can take paper and roll it up into a megaphone and be able to direct sound, something that is normally invisible. And so I realized that, there's this whole possibility that is enabled through interaction that we like tend to like confine to the digital space, but that I wanted to bring into like the physical realm. And I started looking into it, and I'm not the only one who's doing work like this. One of my favorite people to read is Eric Demain, who's at MIT, and he wrote a book called Geometric Folding Algorithms, which the book is all about like solving unsolvable problems in science and engineering through paper folding of all things. So I also recommend checking out The Origami Revolution, which is a Nova documentary about this topic. But just to give you an example type of problem, like there's this really intriguing problem where, they're wondering like, if you want to put an airbag in your car steering column that most rapidly unfurls upon impact, like what's the best way to fold it, to put it in there? Or even with like DNA and RNA protein sequences, like they come folded, but researchers are most interested in like the sequence of data on those protein sequences. And so it's kind of like, what's the minimum number of places you need to cut those sequences so that you can unfurl them and witness them without like destroying it. So, these are all things that like are, if you think about like how to untie a knot with your, just normal unaided human eyes and your normal unaided human hands, you're probably going to get further than like most computer programs can do. There's something called Moravec's paradox that explains that, a lot of times like things that are super easy for us and are almost like background, things that a 2-year-old can do are the most challenging for computers. Whereas, things that are more in this like realm of abstractions are things that computers really excel at. All right, now I'm stuck over here. Yeah. So, I realized that in these like high tech fields, there was this sort of like agnosticism to like what was, being dealt with physically and what was being dealt with digitally, like what was being dealt with purely in the realm of abstractions and like what was being translated back into like tactile thinking and tactile intelligence. And so I started like applying this to my own work and thinking about it like more critically, and kind of came to this this working theory that, the things that we call craft and the things that we call tech oftentimes have more to do with our biases, with the dominance of the Western Industrial Revolution, with people's preconceptions of like the differences between the two than it does with actual function, like how far they are apart. And so I started exploring this like through origami tessellations. This is a set of like risographed folding patterns that I made. And I made it in part because I wanted to play around with like 2D typographic form that resembled the 3D tessellations I was printing them on. And so I could make this Mioriori fold lettering style and then put it on a Mioriori fold and like see like all of the cool ways it got distorted and like warped and stuff. And this was happening. I made this like when there was a whole lot of like new like variable type enthusiasm, and there were a lot of sliders and parameters, and I was like, what can't you put on a parameter? But I made this project, in part because I was like so intrigued by Eric Demain's work, but also like started looking into like where the shape came from, how it came to be, what was its history, and found something really, really fascinating. So the Mioriori fold, the reason it has that kind of cool, weird name is because it's named for Kyoryo Miori, who was a Japanese astrophysicist who is its namesake. I'm not going to say he invented it because a lot of these paper things just kind of like existed in culture for a very long time. And then were eventually named for whoever really did a deep dive into it. And oh boy, did he. So if you search for Kyoryo Miori, you'll find a very long investigation of the shape and what it does to force. Like if you put force into it, like how it redirects those that force into this kind of multi-directional paper spring. And it does so through all of these modular units that are linked together, which is really fascinating. But the real reason that it was named for Koryo Miori is that he designed a spacecraft out of this shape. And then they decided to name it. So they didn't even decide to name this cool thing that had all of this potential and possibility for solving these highly technical problems until it was used in spacecraft design. So it kind of like proves my point on a lot of different levels. Also, I apologize that this is the worst photo possible of this, this thing. So this all crumples up. It's an array of solar panels that's on this satellite. And the reason, or I guess the advantage of having it crumple up in this way is that it's a very low energy way. Like you just have to pull the sheet up, down, and it springs out left, right, and it gets all of these little like modular panels of paper to rotate in this very choreographed way, like in unison. And the advantage of that, like in a solar panel, is that you can very easily make those solar panels track with the sun and maximize the amount of sun that each one is getting. So yeah, after doing this and like jumping into this research, I felt no shame in just prioritizing projects where it wasn't necessarily physical, it wasn't necessarily digital, but it allowed my brain and my hand to like work in tandem, like with abstractions physically. And so I started researching like a lot of these different like paper calculators. So this one is called a Vauvel, and it is, it's, you know, basically a whole bunch of like different like die cuts that selectively show and hide information from you. So I used mine to solve this like very thorny problem of, should I take that job? So as like a graphic designer, as a freelancer, I constantly get emails asking if I want to take jobs, and they're all bad. Like they're all like some aspect of it that are bad. Like it'll be a really exciting project, but it won't pay anything, or it'll be someone who I never want to work for, but they're offering me a pile of money. And so I just felt like I was fed up with trying to figure out like which ones I should actually say yes to or not. So I outsourced those decisions to this little paper calculator. And it's a Vauvel. It's a very, very old format. So the first Vauvels appeared in astronomical text in like the 1500s, where they were trying to, people were trying to like make sense of like what was happening in the cosmos and the heavens. And they could tell that it was on this like repeating cycle. And so you start seeing all of these books that have these paper wheels in them. But these things really like blew up in the 1950s. This is a farm calculator, and they're kind of like used in this almost like the apps of like, the 1950s, where it would do like one calculation. And so you needed like an entire filing cabinet of these things. And it was often used for promotional purposes. So with this one, they were probably selling tractors or something, but you can use it to like calculate your farm yield. So you turn it and you say like, oh, okay, I want like asparagus, 15 bushel of asparagus in the fall. What do I have to do? And it'll tell you all of the steps. So with mine, I basically researched what made people happy and sad and work, and then broke it into these 4 different questions that like you interrogate yourself about. And so for every job you're considering, you have to consider the working conditions. You have to consider whether, in your subjective opinion, the work improves the world or it makes the world worse, because that really matters. You have to assess whether it's a good fit, and you have to assess whether you're going to be paid for it or not. And so when you turn all of those little wheels...
So this is sort of a paper chatbot that I made, which facilitates a philosophical...
I forgot that I had text and sound in there.
Happiness. By answering the question of, should I take that job, which you rate the attributes of by turning these paper wheels to answer questions on the nature of the working conditions, all the way to the amount of money you're paid. And it outputs a specific color that correlates to the attributes of this job, which you can then find on the back, and it'll tell you what to expect in your future. So
yeah, so it gives you this entire spectrum. So this is kind of like how it differs from like an online quiz, for example. Like if you've ever taken like a personality quiz or like who should I date or like whatever, um, you usually get one answer. And I feel like the advantage of this is that like you see this entire spectrum of work, and you might end up in this like red zone over here, which is super duper positive. Like you're making a lot of money, you're doing whatever you want, you feel great about it. Or you might end up in this brown zone, which is like the zone of like shit jobs. So, you're improving your comedy routine. You're putting your deferred passions into a side project, all of this stuff. You're making no money. But yeah, so the reason I think that it becomes like a philosophical object is because you can gaze out on this wheel among all of these other possibilities and think about like, okay, well, how do I get there? And then you naturally kind of like flip over the wheel and start tinkering with the answers to like understand like how it works. So I feel like, these kinds of things where you can intellectually, where your brain and your hand work in tandem to explore a philosophical concept, to explore abstractions, that is really what I want to do, like with all of my work, whether it's, displayed in physical space or digital space. So a lot of times I approach projects just by simply like misusing materials. Like, paper is not supposed to be computational. It's not supposed to work the same way as a computer does. And Rain-X is not supposed to be like an art supply. But, I feel like this is like the biggest block for a lot of creative people I see, is that they feel like, oh, I should be doing something. Or if I identify as like a computational artist, I have to be working in this specific medium and not a different medium. And I think just kind of like trusting the materials to tell you what they can and can't do is like a really, really good approach as an artist to basically find new possibilities, like hiding in plain view. So I have been, Vera knows this, I've been completely obsessed with this technique called Riso animation, which I think I invented, where basically I will make an animation using like open frameworks or After Effects or something. And then I print it out on this machine, which is a Riso or a Riso. A little contentious on how you pronounce it, but it's this machine that's stuck in this purgatory between the physical and the digital, which I am also stuck in that purgatory. So I feel like I relate to this machine a whole lot. But you can basically automate contact sheets where all of your frames are on an 11x17 sheet, which it then prints. And then you can stitch them back together again and get this like just lusciously grainy print animation that like highlights like all of the idiosyncrasies of the printing process. So I think normally like when prints come out of the Riso or Riso, you don't even notice like how like warpy and strange and how grainy they are, and like how many little pieces of hair fell on your print while it was printing. But as soon as you take that and stitch it back into an animation, you can see like here, like one of the idiosyncrasies of the Riso is that it's hard to register the colors. People always complain about this. They say it's a bug, not a feature, but if you're making like a very watery animation like this and the colors are kind of like floating in and out of registration, it just becomes this like, kind of like divine celebration of like analog and like grit, and bringing analog and grit back into like these kind of digital experiences. Another fun thing is that, this is something that I made for XYZ Type. Some friends of mine who created this new typeface called Aglet Mono, and they needed something to post to Instagram, as we all do. I feel like I'm always on Instagram, but yeah. So they needed an animation, but they also wanted a physical thing, and this was a way to like do both of them at once, where we had these like fun printed contact sheets that if people ordered the typeface, they would get these in the mail, but also something to like announce it. So So yeah, that was fun. I do that a lot. Like this is a book fair that I organized. I didn't do it this year, but most years I organize like a holiday art book fair, and I always sort of like print out. I use the contact sheets, like all of like the waste from that, to create these posters. So this is a music video that I made for my friend Taraka, and this was all done on the computer, then printed out on the Riso, and then scanned back in, and like then using all kinds of like blending modes and stuff to get this like kind of otherworldly effect. This project, this music video, it's all about this like specific code of numbers that like the subculture on YouTube believes is like basically like the phone number to dial aliens. So it's we wanted to create this like very otherworldly, like there's all these like communication signals kind of like going through the lines. This was the rare paying client job, which is like so great for Vice. Rest in peace. But they were a fantastic client because I was like, I want to create a Riso animation that mimics the feeling of being on the subway when the sun is setting and you get that reflection from across the street of like warm light. So yeah, this is definitely like, I wouldn't have been able to make this animation without the precision afforded to me by the computational control of this animation. But I also wouldn't be able to bring back that warmth and that like organic feeling that I can really lets me like linger on it and like sink my teeth into it without printing it out in physical space. So I feel like there's always ways to like leverage like what's awesome and what you love about, you know, code and digital spaces. And then also at the same time, be able to bring it back into these like craft modalities where you can like really celebrate what's luscious and beautiful in those realms. Like, for example, how ink overlaps. You can never get that exact same look on a computer. It's always a collaboration between you and the printing medium and your materials. It's a collaboration with you and material reality that you can't get in another way. So yeah, I you know, kind of to sum this up, you know, I really want to put people's hands on these different abstractions that I feel like data physicalization is better than data visualization. You know, making things and getting people to feel it out activates like parts of ourselves and parts of our brain that like are not activated otherwise. And I feel like this is the true purpose of tech, is to jump back and forth. And I feel that way, you know, I think we intellectually think and intuit to it like a lot more about the world through our bodies than we realize. So I know we understand that like, you know, touchy-feely information like comes through the skin, but you know, I feel like a lot of the ideas we think through, intellectual ideas, come through as friction and resistance, like much more than we acknowledge. There's this great quote by Hermann von Helmholtz, who is this 19th century physicist, that, you know, all we know, everything we know is an event on the skin. You know, whether you're reading something that's light photons hitting your retina, whether you're hearing something, which is like wobbly air hitting your eardrums. It's really, you know, we're in this period of like data and information, which we like talk about like a whole lot. But, you know, I think the fact that like the physical part of us is the turnstile, which all of that must pass, is like a very profound thing that we should not overlook. So I think about, I think about, for example, like when I was a little kid, you know, I had a radio with an antenna on it, and like, in order to like tune into a station, I had to like fiddle with that antenna. And that was like a very crappy piece of technology. It was not good, but something about like that physical interaction with the antenna like made me aware that I was like walking through a world with like invisible music that could be caught at any point in time with like the right kind of antenna. And I love that idea. So, you know, thinking back to my start with data visualization, you know, if you think about like what a computer needs, like if you were working on something in processing or open frameworks, you always need this CSV file, rows and columns of numbers. But, if I ask you as a human being to look at those rows and columns of numbers and pick out like the largest number, the smallest number, make any kind of like intelligent observations about like what that data is doing, it's very, very difficult. But then as soon as you take those same numbers and put them on a map, you then open them up to this physical intuition of touch, which has evolved alongside of us for, thousands and thousands of years of navigating the world spatially. So kind of like the same skill that will help you like get out of the conference room without like bumping into people or chairs allows you to then look at these numbers on a map and use that like very, very deep, very intelligent, like spatial reasoning to understand exactly like what's happening with those numbers. So yeah, in my work, I'm always like just trying to like incorporate this sense of touch and grit. Like even if it's an experience that's always going to be like trapped on the other side of a computer screen, even if no one will touch it. Like these are some paper stop motion animations I worked on, and people were giving me a hard time. They're like, why are you leaving in the strings? Like, this is a mistake. You should take out the strings. You should like remove all of the little like fuzzy glue pieces. But I feel like that, like, everyone has these like memories of like flying a kite. And so when you see like a string attached to this like flying object, it just like activates that sense of touch. It activates that sense of empathy, which I think is like kind of like a connective tissue between both, us, like each other, but also like us as material beings and like the world around us. So I know I'm going over. I'm just going to show you like a couple more things really quickly. I think this is the first project that I worked on where I realized that I could use these physical objects to connect people to abstractions that they didn't know about yet. So this is a project that I worked on for my friends Mike and Karen, and let me see if I could advance here. Yeah. So what this was is it's a wedding invitation for them, and we created this paper record player wedding invitation. And this is when people first did get it, they'll notice that by turning this disc, normal records are like vinyl and thick and opaque. This one we printed on clear acetate so that we could do this trick, basically, so that I could print this little caricature of Mike and Karen in black on this record so that people would put their hands on it and start turning it, which was necessary because the next thing that we asked people to do was to turn it at exactly 45 RPM to hear a song inviting them to the wedding. So there's the wedding invitation itself, and there's a needle attached to this little red disc here. And you put it on the record, and then you turn it at exactly 45 RPM. Yeah, so it doesn't sound good at all, but it did work, and it was such an important project for me because like I put that video on the internet and it went like viral in a way that I still don't completely understand. Like I got invited on morning time TV shows and stuff, and it made me think really deep and hard about like my relationship to tech and expectations of tech, because I thought like, wait, don't we expect our objects to function well? Like, why would so many people get really, really excited about this like, piece of technology that is incredibly crappy, that almost comically so. I was the only one who could like turn it to make it sound like music. It really just, no one could do it. So I realized like from that response that my job was to let people bring their interaction to it, to bring their full brains, and like allow the magic to be what happens in that interaction, rather than kind of like pre-chewing it. That maybe I didn't have to give people sophisticated things because what they brought to it was already sophisticated. So I've been kind of like working on a whole lot of different pop-up books and publishing projects that like work off of that premise. So this one is called This Book is a Planetarium, which is a very, very literal title. This is a little video, but it's trying to transform that question of like, how does it work, into deeper questions about like how the world works. And so take all of these objects that are normally thought of as like highly technologized, oftentimes electronic, things that are gadgets that people don't necessarily understand how they use, and then strip them down to their bare bones, like paper minimum. So this is a perpetual calendar that explains how Gregorian time works. This is an instrument that explains how sound works in terms of like pitch and vibration, and allows you to put your hands on it and play with it. This decoder ring explains like the very basis of computer encryption. Speaker talks about like how sound is a physical thing that you can manipulate. And then, Spirograph. This is kind of like, this is like open frameworks, but like physically. So like shows how like math can create these like different drawings. And the best thing in the book, and the reason why it's called This Book is Planetarium, is because this is the most fun thing, I think. You turn on the flashlight on your smartphone and project it onto the ceiling. But yeah, like if you take it apart, there's like no hidden parts in it. And so it just kind of like reduces the interface between you and like the wonders of the world. So I made this and I wasn't really sure if kids would be into it, because all kids have like iPhones and iPads now, and infinite choice, infinite immediate wish fulfillment. But yeah, like they like it, which is cool. People send me pictures of their kids like all the time. Like if you go on Amazon reviews, there are all of these pictures of kids being like, "Whoa, stars!" Like, yes, I did it. I also created this other book, another super literal title called This Book is a Camera, which is all about like how light works. And, we take light for granted because we're always surrounded by light, but within the context of a camera obscura or a pinhole camera, you can really carefully observe what light is doing, which is surprising. So the way that the book works is that you load photo paper into the back of it, and then you can expose it to light, and it exposes that photo paper in the back. And then you can go back into the dark and develop it with instant coffee and baking soda. And you make these images that like, they look like they're straight out of like the late 1800s, early 1900s. This is like how the first cameras worked. But it isn't necessarily like a less sophisticated technology per se, because there are these different aesthetic qualities that you don't get with lensed photos. For example, like in this picture of the Brooklyn Bridge, you can see that everything's kind of like in an equal amount of focus. So you can see like, the bricks of the Brooklyn Bridge, you could see the buildings in the distance, and you can also see this like Sharpie graffiti in the foreground, which is kind of incredible. Like if you have a lens, you have to choose like what's in focus and what's out of focus. But yeah, with this, like you did, it just, everything comes in on the splat plane. So yeah, this was one that I self-published myself, and then MoMA picked it up and republished it. So it's actually available in the world. Okay, last little thing I'm going to show you is that I've been researching since 2019 typography, specifically like how different letter forms get their shape from technology and culture. And I have a book that's coming out with Letterform Archive next year, which is typically, as typical of me, an interactive like pop-up book with a whole lot of like hands-on explorations of letterform and technology. But it's also about human perception, and it's about how letter forms teach us about our own perception. And so this is a book, but it was also this exhibition that I had at the Center for Book Arts last year. So I'm also teaching a class at ITP called Typography and Technology. So yeah, there's just it's coming in a lot of forms. But all of the text for the exhibition, I'm very proud of myself. I built these boxes where you can like take a pamphlet, like you're in the bathroom taking a paper towel, and you get an essay. But yeah, like the premise of this, as is the premise of like most of the things I make, is that there are a lot of different entry points, and that everyone can play with things. Everyone can touch things. So for example, there's a whole section about anti-aliasing and like how type was, the continuous lines of type that we like associate with like wood type and letterpress printing were atomized and brought into the grid on the computer. And, that may or may not interest you. As a designer, you might pick up a pamphlet about that and be like, yes, I want to read about it. But this is like a hands-on table that uses these polarization filters to explain the feathering of anti-aliasing. Like, how do we recreate these continuous curves within the system where it's like all of these like little gridded blocks. And so this shows the feathering. So you can turn it from, 0% opacity, 90 degrees to 100% opacity, and like basically like feel out like what is happening on the computer screen. So yeah, this book hopefully will be out in August. I don't know. We've been saying that like every year, but yeah, there's a lot of like essays about like automation and the future of typography, accompanied by like these little pull string things. There's a whole lot of super fun pop-ups. I'm gonna skip ahead because I'm like way over time, but very proud of this one. I just want to show you all the cover because it's like the most recent thing that I got done. Oh, this is all about like how photo typesetting works. And it lets you kind of like go into your bathroom and make a psychedelic light show. But yeah, so like this is the most recent prototype for the cover. So it's going to mimic like a 7-segment display, like those old like alarm clocks. And it goes from A to Z. And I'm just going to keep on saying that this is going to really exist. The publisher has said, okay, but they might change their mind because this is like the most wild book cover that I think anyone's ever proposed. But yeah, go from A to Z, like a 7-segment display. And I think it's going to look like that. So yeah, that's, I'm way over. I'm sorry, you all, but yeah, that's what I've been up to and what I do. And, yeah, kind of like what I want you all to challenge yourself in thinking about in your own work is like how to jump back and forth between these two different realms. So thank you so much for being patient with me.
Thank you. All right. Now that one is working. Oh, okay, now it's good. Thank you, Kelli. Thank you so much. I had no inclination to interrupt you because I wanted the other 100 slides to. You called this realm between the digital and the physical purgatory as if it's sort of a bad place to be. It looks like you're having a lot of fun there as well, right? In this in-between space, and also encouraging us to not think of the digital as something immaterial, right? So, Mike, just for the sake of time, I'm going to just ask one question and see if there are other questions. And my question is this. It's about complexity, right? The topics you're working with are super complex. And I was thinking there is a link between the word complexity and the fold, right? Complexity means all folded up somehow, right? Like all scrunched up. And to open things up that are complex is to show how they work. Now, most magicians think that you lose the magic. And you seem to be saying, showing how things work doesn't actually use the magic. can you give us a little peek inside your magician's toolbox and explain like how you see magic, if it's what you do is magic?
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now. Go ahead.
That was all me. Yeah, no, that's such a great question, and thanks for asking it. Yeah, I think that there's a disagreement, in terms of like what people want out of magic. I think with comedy, I don't want the joke explained, but with magic, I found that like if you keep on asking how it works and go further and further, like tunneling into something, you get at better and better magic. Especially with regards to the physical world. And I think that like I definitely learned this, like getting in the weeds, learning about typography and perception and all of these little tweaks that were made to our digital experience of reading typography on screens, that, when you get really, really super deep into any technology, you kind of like end back at us, and our own perception, which we don't understand yet. We have evolved on this like massive time scale over thousands and thousands of years. And so there's a lot of things where it's like, oh no, we just don't understand why that works. For example, like if you look at any geometric sans serif, monolinear typeface, it's going to be a little wider on the vertical of the T than on the horizontal of the T. You can do this right now, like open up Futura, open up anything, and you'll see that like it's a little bit wider on the vertical than on the horizontal, like crossbar on the top. And you have to do that in order to make it look like they're the same thickness. And we don't know why. This is just how our perception works, that we give more weight to horizontal lines. Like you might have heard that like if you want to like appear like more svelte and slim, that you're supposed to wear like vertical stripes rather than horizontal stripes. It's because our eyes just naturally put like a greater emphasis on horizontal lines, and they don't know why. They think, maybe because lions, that when we were on the African savanna, that we were scanning the horizon constantly for predators. But there are all of these like deep mysteries that like, I think getting into them doesn't diminish the magic for me. It just makes me absolutely convinced that there's like more magic to find, that there's like more possibility like within things.
That's a great trust in that way. I think a lot of people are afraid of finding out how things work for many reasons, because they don't think they'll understand, but also because maybe they like the illusion. And what you're saying is, look really closely. It's still magical. It's amazing what's happening, especially if we use our bodies in that and get involved and touch and feel it. There's a question from Max Rodenkirchen online, who loves your work too. Fan. Question is, are there any other printing techniques that you like to use except for the Riso or Riso printing? What are your other favorite printing techniques?
Well, I've been really wanting to get into like lino printing and doing some animations with that, and I haven't yet, but I hope to over the holiday break when I have more time. But I've also, silk screening is really great and useful because you can get all kinds of special effects ink. There's glow in the dark ink. There's thermochromatic ink that like changes color when you touch it, like with your body warmth. So silk screen is really super fun. I have like a letterpress here. So I do letterpress sometimes, which is really nice because you get like an impression in the paper as well as an image. But the Riso is like my favorite because it's like so fast, it's like
especially
the fast
for multiples.
food version.
Yes.
Totally.
Any last question? Yes, we have one question here in the room in Rotterdam. I'm going to hand you the mic.
Hi, thank you so much for your sharing. I was really impressed by your work. So I actually don't know if you have an answer to this, but I'll be very interested in how you see this. I work in digital design, and it seems like these days most kind of interaction points are on apps and websites, and especially apps. And I think where I'm standing, you start to see kind of a more like a very, let's say, formulated way of designing interactions between a phone and human beings. And it's not per se as inspiring as the things you're sharing, personally thinking, you know. But seeing that that is the medium that seems to dominate this interaction, sometimes I wonder if there's, you know, a way out of it. So my question to you, sorry, long question, is that how do you view the current sort of trend or the current status of iPhones and Android and what they are doing to our perceptions, and how do we return to more tactical realities? Thank you.
So it's about the mobile phone, the tiny screen age. How do you work in this?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this question a lot because I really, really, really need to redesign my portfolio site. Like I think the last time I designed it was like a decade ago. And so it's that question of like, okay, should I do something that is like more playful and idiosyncratic and fun? Or do I respect the fact that everyone's like super busy and they don't really want to be on screens anymore, and just make an experience that's like easy to digest and in line with people's expectations for how a website should work? And I think at the beginning of my career, the easy answer was like, oh, of course, I'm going to make something experimental and fun and playful. And like now I'm not so sure, because like in a way, by like making it easy for people to get to point B in digital experiences, we're doing them a favor because we're helping them like get off the phone, you know, presumably, and like play more in the world. But I don't know, and it's a real philosophical conundrum, I think. But you know, there's always like, if you're in a situation where you're designing with that specific goal to be like super in line with like current like UX and UI practices, there's always fun to be had with like animation and color and typography and gradients. And so I think that like there's potentially like little areas where you can exploit and do something unexpected without like making it like a cumbersome experience for the user. But I'm with you. I'm kind of scratching my head, and I don't really know how to approach digital space right now, which may be why I'm so drawn to these like physical experience at the moment. So it's probably an unsatisfying answer, but yeah, I wanted to give you an honest one.
An honest one is to bring us back into this 3D reality, which is still there, even if you're holding your phone. All right. Thank you so much. We're going to take a little break here, but not before we give a warm round of applause to Kelli.
Thank you.
All right. Our break is a little bit shorter. So let's take 5. So rehydrate, water in, water out, oxygen in, oxygen out. See you in 5. All right, let's find our places again. Welcome back. Welcome to those in Rotterdam. Welcome to those around the world on the live stream. Welcome to those of the future, which may include ourselves who are watching this again at some point. And especially a warm welcome to our speaker of this block, Ari Melenciano, whose work I discovered through the invitation to moderate today, and I'm really excited to talk to you. Hi, Ari. Ari is an artist, technologist, and researcher, and a theorist whose work reveals the synergy between computation, cultural metacognition, and transcendental expression. He's a frequent public speaker and guest lecturer at universities around the world, sharing her research on creative and societally inquisitive uses of emerging technologies. Within her studio and research practice, she is currently designing epistemologies for artistic expression at the nexus of the collective consciousness and unconsciousness. I'm particularly interested, Ari, in your work on the mythopoetic. So how the stories we tell, the myths that are part of our collective consciousness are things we can mirror ourselves in, but also discover new patterns in the world. So I'm very excited to hear more about your work. The floor is yours for the next half an hour, and then we'll have some questions afterwards.
Thank you. Very, very nice to join you all. I'm going to talk, I will bring in some mythopoetic works since you mentioned it. Yeah. So let me share my screen. Okay. Hello all. Thank you for having me. I'm going to talk a bit about I titled this Ecological Ensembles. Ecological as in like ecological of the world around us, the ecosystems, but thinking about them in relation to sound and also to logic systems. And I just wanted to bring back the, and can you hear me all okay? I have my heater on and it's blasting. You can hear me pretty clearly? Okay, great. So I have this description of the talk that I gave. There is sentient code all around us at all times. In this talk, I'm going to share how I engage with sentient code of plants, which are also, funny enough, considered botanical quantum computing, which is amazing to me, and as a central source in creating biosonifications. And I'm going to root these explorations in a collection of research on historical relationships between plants, sound, spirituality, and consciousness. So the first part of this talk is going to be a big dump of research that I've been doing for the past bit. So a lot of screenshots and excerpts from different books. And then I'm going to talk a bit more about the actual sonic work I've been doing. So for one, I don't know if anyone has ever heard this term before, sacred geometry, but it's been a really interesting term for me in understanding the ways that the world, the natural world around us, has a lot of different correlations mathematically. So this one, I think this is from the book Cosmic Dance, of it discussing the correlation between, there's a correspondence between plants and music that exists within a lot of indigenous cosmologies, but there's also something really interesting of this intricate abstract geometries between sound, plants, and the world around us. And so this one goes in and talking about the correlation between sound and image. So another thing that a lot of researchers have found is when they play when they play sounds at different frequencies or use tuning forks with these different devices that emit sound, when you visualize them, there is a sort of geometric pattern that is created. So to the left, you can see sound figures in this work on the research on the discovery of sound. And on the right, you see light reflected off of tuning forks when they are emitting their own sounds. There's also studies on the relationships, as I mentioned earlier, between the symmetrical patterns of plants, whether it's flowers or other plants, and also forms of geometry, and even other parts of the world around us. So even when thinking about how the planets move around within the planetary scale of Mercury and Venus's movement in celestial space, and how that also looks very similar to flower petals when you look at them from a top view. So this correlation between just the solar system and planetary and plant system. And even here of looking at Venus's movement and studying how that looks very similar to even things like pineapples, the radial of pineapples, even the Fibonacci sequence a bit. Another really interesting part of my research has been, as was mentioned earlier, mythopoetic practices, which is really what brought me into that space, was understanding the power of myth and how humans have used myth since the beginning of language, and our ability, even before language, of using pictures, but have tried to figure out ways to tell stories on the phenomena that we're experiencing, and to know that myth is something that has existed around the world in a very central way of sense making, but also forms of astrology and astronomy are something that have existed around the world. Of almost every culture around the world has their own idea of astrology, and using very similar archetypes to represent different times periods. And then also astronomy, of this is a map on the right is a star map from Korea in the 14th century, and Korea was one of the leaders, earliest leaders in thinking about astronomy and the way the celestial systems that surround us. Another part of this research has been on use of rhythms, and how that's been a useful tool to tap into the divine energy and spiritual energy. So this one, I brought in this excerpt from a book. I wish I didn't have enough time to write the books down, but I'm going to try and find them and send them all to you. But this one talks a bit about mentioning how many indigenous African languages didn't even have a word for music, yet they didn't like a word for dance, or even a word, and they had multiple words for rhythm. So for one, I love to study language and how that has shown the values of different cultures. And so this is a really significant moment of understanding how it's not, when they were considering sound, it wasn't so much of like this trying to like pop culture ideas of music, but it was more of a tool for moving their body. And especially what they really emphasized was this understanding of pretty much a coding with the drum using rhythm. I also love in the second part, the beats of the drum aren't here to be an expression of identity or individuality in the sense of being the work of an individual artist, but to access a way to live and be with others. They can contribute to survival of all, the operating as call and response, reinforcing the reciprocity of communal living. And so I brought in this image because another thing that I like to do is study the lineage of how all of these how these ideas have manifested over time. So this idea of call and response, which is very significant to especially African-based or music that's originated from the African diaspora, of this leader, and then also the group, the communal group, and the leader kind of moving the group through this call and response, but also understanding the practice of rhythm and rhythm making, of that not being an individualist way that we think of creativity today, but that's really a communal way for everyone to gather and experience this collectively. Here I have from the same book, another excerpt saying part of what was powerful about the enslaved person Shum was not only its use as a cipher of coded messages, but its use as an abstract portal to a lost ancestry, to the spirits of previous generations, and as the glue that made members of community feel connected to common heritage. And I brought this in, especially thinking about this program, especially of thinking of different ways of thinking of code beyond what's on our computer and through digital techniques, but even through sonic techniques, of drumming being a way that people have used from around the world to tap into the spiritual energy and to have access to the ancestral understandings, and to feel again as part of this community. Another part of this says, and percussion runs throughout that ancestry like sap within a tree. Each of the countless tribes across the vast African continent use different drums and beat them in different ways for different reasons. And so even around the continent itself, how instrumentation changes, but really the technique and the purpose is the same. And I also just love that quote of thinking about this as an analogy to even the sap that runs through tree, because I think for me, another thing I've been really interested in studying is the relationship between our own consciousness as individual human beings and whether we have access to our ancestry or not, and then also trees and their access to their own ancestries, and that ability to access to know who you are and tap into that energy. And so now I just brought in here some examples of how instrumentation has been used all over the world in very specific ways to become more acquainted with their spiritual energy. So in the African culture, as mentioned in that last slide, of using talking drums like the djembe, which has been used in different even revolutions that have allowed people to obtain their freedom, like and independence, like in Haiti, the Haitian Revolution uses djembe drums. But the fact that this is even a coded technique of using the ways that one would tap onto their drums as a way to communicate language, and that being a tool to communicate language across further spaces than how the human voice could. So people from wide-ranging areas could hear each other using the drum. Another one of the Moroccan music, and that being a form of spiritual healing. So they would use their instruments to especially invoke these trance-like states. And that's been really interesting of how different communities have used these patterns specifically to get into this trance. And as was mentioned earlier, a lot of my work is thinking about both the conscious and the subconscious worlds. And so the trance is very much a tool to tap into that subconscious world. Native American shamanic drumming. So again, using the drum as a way to perform prayer and do rituals. And so oftentimes these would be in the form of different drum circles where you would have different drummers, the people dancing around and kind of purely embodying the beat and trying to get into this trance subconscious world. Hinduism and the sitar. So this is often associated with Hindu classical music, but this also being a tool to tap into the divine. So again, we're seeing even outside of the Native American or outside the African continent, but even in the Asian continent, of instrumentation to spirituality. And again, on the Asian continent, the Japanese flute, and that being a tool for Zen Buddhism. So using this as a way to tap into enlightenment and spiritual awakening by the sonic frequencies that would be emitted and the compositions that would be created from this instrument. And even in Australia, with the natives there, the didgeridoo and exploring dreamtime. And so they would create these ceremonies that, and it's interesting that they use this idea of dreamtime, which is also something when you read a lot of different ideas of spirituality and enlightenment, dreamtime is very much also, again, of this subconscious, what's happening in our, not the conscious ways that we understand the world, but what's inside of us that we have suppressed or just have not given access to. And even here with the Sufi whirling and the music, of using music and also with the flute similar to the Japanese to again introduce this trance-like state of doing this whirling, kind of like completely impacting your senses with this whirling and using that as a way to tap into this spiritual connection. And of course, I think this is probably one of the most popular ways that most of us know of the Tibetan singing bowls, and that being a form of Buddhism, of using these and using the specific frequencies. Many of these bowls, it depends on the material that they're used. If they're using these sorts of metal, they can be a combination of several frequencies just because of the material itself. But if you use crystal bowls, that is more, usually it's only a single frequency, and those differ. The Eastern world has also been significant in understanding the correlation between different sonic frequencies and how they tap into our different energy centers, or other communities might call it chakras. And so these bowls usually tap into specific energies, centers within the body. I've also been doing research on different sonic techniques. And so it's fascinating how these communities have been able to understand these ideas before this form of science has developed to even create these words. But a lot of this is what these different communities were exploring and already developing within their practice. So this idea of entrainment, which is understanding that with music influencing consciousness through entrainment is the process of using external rhythmic stimuli, such as music or drumming, and how that synchronizes then with the brain's neural oscillations. So this idea of the pattern of a drum can now impact the way that your brain is, the oscillation of your own brain, which then also creates these trance-like states. Studying brainwave patterns. So again, if these ideas of trance states associated with the brain activity, and specifically this happens in the theta or alpha waves of thinking about how music can facilitate these different shifts neurologically. Hypnotic induction, which is also very similar to these trance-like tools, devices of using sound in a very repetitive way, creating hypnotic music using slow tempos, soothing melodies, and repetitive patterns. Binaural beats, which have also been something that I've seen more propping up more, becoming more prevalent lately. You can just YouTube a bunch of these different videos, and what binaural beats does is it has one frequency playing into one ear, another frequency playing into the other ear, and the idea is that with between both of them, your ability to decipher both of them through your ears creates a whole new frequency, and that changes your state of consciousness, and again, create this idea of trance. And then there is research on the botanical effects, so how have plants and ecologies impacted us. So I have here a few different images, just showing the progression from the smallest scale of, this is on the left, you see an image right here of a flower being planted inside of a tin can, and this is being used, this is a moment, this was created in the Sitar camp in Jordan, which is the biggest refugee camp for Syrian refugees. And so how communities there have created their own temporal gardens of understanding the significance of plants and botany surrounding them to give them senses of hope, and to even metaphorically plant roots into the surroundings that they don't belong, like that's not their land and they have to create new homes being refugees. So using this as a symbol of hope and of rootedness, but also the sacredness of plants. I think the Japanese are some of the most, they're my favorite people in creating and understanding the relationship between plants and humans and the world around us. And so I love this image, especially because I have a lot of plants in my own home, and one of my biggest guilts is the fact that they're in pots. And I don't think we think enough about that, of the fact that plants need to be able to spread their roots into the soil and the environment. And so to see people being able to have plants inside of their own home, but respecting the fact that these plants need to be dispersed and inside of the ground. And then also understanding the significance of things like forest bathing. A lot of people understand that simply by being within nature, of how that really impacts one's psyche and energy and all of that. This is also another area of research that I've been really interested in, which is the church forest in Ethiopia. And so what's happening here is you see a drone-like view of this church, which is in the center, and there are a few of these, and the forest that surrounds it, and also all this dry land that's happening. And this is something that's happening around the world, of our lack of attention to the forest and the natural forestry that's around us. I think worldwide, there's only 2 to 5% of the trees that have existed since the beginning of time that still exist. And so there are communities that are trying to protect the natural forestry that has existed. And what they also do is find such a direct correlation between the ecological systems and their forms of spirituality. So in the center, they would often have a church. And so to even get to this church, you would have to move through this forest. But the idea is also that the church is not just within the perimeter, the confines of this building, but it's the entire environment. It's a sacred forest. And so here, this is from the Emergence magazine. And so it says, our Western conceptions of belief are almost entirely inward and private. Here, at other points of my journey into these forests, I was witnessing the performance of a mystical geography, the soul's journey to God made visible in the landscape. And so, as I was mentioning earlier, it's not just about this church that we often have in modern environments around the world now, where you kind of like you step off the street and you enter this building, but instead it's completely embracing the ecological world around you and using it as a way to a sacred way of embracing it. More research on general indigenous cosmologies, what's also been interested, even outside of the ways that we have engaged with plants, whether it's through gardening or through planting or through the forests themselves, but also how indigenous people have understood how they've even received knowledge. And so there's a lot of work around and understandings and stories around how people have received knowledge through medicinal plants themselves, whether it's psychotropic, like mushrooms, or even just herbal, like tea and other forms. But also not even through just plants itself, but even through musical transmission, and even the combination of both. And the combination of both is something that is experienced through the Amazonian spirituality, ayahuasca. Another really interesting, some other research I've been uncovering is this idea of how, similar to that last slide, of this idea of the ingestion of mushrooms, how that has been so impactful to humans. There's been a lot of theories around, even if it was in the biblical terms, and how the Bible is really a reflection of so many different religions and spiritualities around the world. All of them are really telling the same story, but there's often the story about this being in a garden and ingesting something that then gives them some understanding of something greater. And really, these are esoteric symbols of something that has happened, similar to mythology being really just a symbol for phenomena that has happened. So it's not being something that's taken literally, but that's this idea of ingesting something that then creates this extra level of awareness. And some have theorized that maybe what all these different stories are saying is basically this ingestion of mushrooms, and that being a psychotropic experience to something greater. And then there's also the intelligence of plants. And I think this is really important because the reason why so much of our societies really, in many ways, for lack of better words, just disrespect plants and ecologies, natural ecologies, is because we've been taught to believe that they don't have a soul. And that's very rooted in this idea of the impact of Aristotle of understanding that plants, animals have a sensitive soul, they're sentient, but plants, because they don't move, because they don't emit sounds, because they can't communicate to us in ways that we can understand, that we've just relegated them as soulless and insensitive and inanimate. And so we don't consider the ways that we should really just be respecting them more. And this one from a different book of kind of emphasizing that of like, as societies, as modern societies, we are very arrogant to the impact of science that has happened before us. And so much of indigenous cosmologies and understandings of the world and ontologies and epistemologies, all of them have been very rooted in nature and that ability to transcend humanity into something greater and not be so egocentric. Here, and I'm sorry, there's so many, it's really just like a deep dive in all this research, but another one being, what was I saying here? Even plants of being, again, tapping into their sentience. They have a central nervous system. And this one of talking about how plants, when they respond to the environments around them, of how they are able to have even encoded memory of understanding what has happened in the past. And they move in that way, like they show small physical movements within that. But I think one thing that I'm most excited about this research in botanical intelligence is this idea of consciousness. Like, what does it mean to be conscious? And I think in the age of AI, especially in this technological era, we're thinking more specifically about what is consciousness? Like, can machines become conscious? What else is conscious? How do we create a definition around consciousness? And so to tap into the idea of what is consciousness in a botanical form or ecological form, and really kind of relegating it outside of our brain. Like, we often think that thinking and using the brain as a way of being conscious, but I think a lot of other communities have been able to understand that it's not simply all within the brain, that there's actually auratic or energetic or almost like a field force that may be surrounding us, and that may be a form of consciousness that we just don't have an understanding of. We don't have scientific practices that can tap into understanding the five outside of the five senses that we know. And so now finally I'll bring to what I've been doing, which is this excerpt I'm bringing in the bottom part, the middle part of our task is to re-envision and heal the world by reuniting these opposites of thinking / sensing and feeling / intuiting. And I think what makes me really excited about this is because so much of my work is intuitive, and discovering by being intuitive and by using one thing that drew me to the modular synthesizer is after having years playing around with a lot of instruments and learning instruments and engaging in different musician techniques, the modular synthesizer allows for me to do it in a way that's very tactile, and so it's a more sensual way of playing with music, and I think that's really significant. But also just to create and not know where you're going, and to just explore the world and have no idea what's happening. And I think that's what a lot of indigenous communities did so well, is without this confinement of this temporary contemporary form of science, to be able to just explore and create and study the world and find so much more wonder when we're not trying to categorize everything based off of shared understandings or imposing our understandings of the world, I think is really significant. So I use this way of creating as very analogous to how indigenous communities have understood the world around us. And as I was doing this, I was learning, oh wow, that plants and the ways that the central source of my sonic energy is actually using a technique of quantum computing. And quantum computing usually humans have no idea how to create technical forms of quantum computing in room temperature environments. And so plants are doing this in a way that even humans have no idea how to do. And so this ability of just the significance of plants, and even outside of just the ways that I've shared energetically, but mechanically. And so this is the process that I'm doing when I'm creating sounds through modular synthesis. There is clearly the photosynthetic process of the sun emitting its energy onto the plant, this quantum coherence, also called quantum walking, where the energy from the sun doesn't, the way that plants use the energy is it doesn't just try and go from one point to the other like a very like sequential way. It more of emits omnipresently. So this energy scans around the entire plant and constantly trying to find the fastest way to get to the reaction center, which then translates the electromagnetic energy from the sun into sugar for the plant. And so while it's doing all of that, I have a sensor attached to my plants, which the sensor uses the energy that's happening inside the plant to go into my biofeedback sensor. I then use that sensor to, I use the energy that's being captured from that sensor, which then translates that into electronic, into voltage. And I use my oscillator. That voltage then controls my oscillator, and the oscillator is basically this voice. It's like the singing tool. So then it will create this sound. And then I also use a filter just because the sounds from a modular synthesizer can get really ugly and very electronic. So it's nice to just give it some warmth and some balance. And then I take it outside the filter, put it into output, and then I put it inside of my speaker. But I think for me, I'm generally just really excited about what does all of this mean? I think being at this inflection point of having been able to study so much indigenous ways of being, of understanding the relationships between plants and sounds and spirituality and rhythm, and also consciousness, and being in this age of us really grappling with what does consciousness even mean, and then being able to intentionally use all of this work that indigenous communities have used to create these environments for us really excites me. And I think for me, I'm kind of just like mapping it out of this entire ecosystem of consciousness, of how plants, we've been able to study them, the indigenous have been able to, but also the quantum ways that we've been able to study them, humans, and how we have been affected by plants for our consciousness, but also affected through sound. And so this entanglement of consciousness and trying to intentionally create these environments that could tap into our subconscious and also create these psycho experiences. And so I have a few more quotes, but it's probably best if you're interested in this, you can just take a picture. I'm just going to skip through these and really just get through. Really all they're saying is just more of tapping into plants being code, this idea of plants not being an object or a body, but a process of what if we thought more in the way that plants do of the way that we have consciousness now as humans. It's very central to our cognitive study, but plants are this idea of non-conscious, and so they are omnipresent in their consciousness. And then I actually just saw this before entering this call on Instagram of we use language, and I think what's so significant about music and about plants and about spirituality is they are very reliant on the unseen. And I think when we are, as contemporary humans, using language and relying on it so much to make sense of our world, because language is so limited, we are really only understanding the past, and it's hard for us to really understand our complete present and the future. And so to think of how can we move outside of this idea of language and outside of this ideas of always trying to categorize like science does and trying and contain the natural wonder of the world, and really just be as present and immersed in the world as possible without trying to translate it into something that we want to make sense of. And so what I actually want to do is do a live sound thing. I know we have, I'll try to do it in like 2 minutes, so we have some 10 minutes for Q&A. But I also love this quote of, to see a world in a grain of sand and a heaven in a wildflower, hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. For me, I think this emphasizes just the smallness, like whoever thought of using plants as a way to directly derive their energy and create sound. And I think it's really exciting when people just give themselves the permission to kind of just study the really small parts of the world and find the wonder within it. So I'm going to stop sharing there. And what I'm going to do is, what I have here is the setup of the plants. So here are the sensors that are happening within it, and how I'm putting all of that inside of the modular synthesizer, and then, as I showed in the diagram, moving it through all the different parts. So one thing I like to start off with is, as was mentioned earlier, the trance-like states. Let me not behead myself and show my head. The trance-like states that are done through drums. So when I create these soundscapes, the drum pattern is really important, and using something that's very simple so that your mind kind of like, you don't have anything to guess. I think that's really the most important part, is trying to subdue the mental cognitive activity and just simplify it by using rhythm that's really trance-inducing. And then what I have is a sensor that's using the energy from the plants, and I've converted into, as I mentioned earlier, my VCO, my oscillator. And so I'm going to give a voice to the energy that's moving through the plants. It takes a lot of trial and error to get something that sounds decent, because it's such a portal, but it's also just extremely experimental. And then sometimes I like to add a little bit of texture, so I'll add another drum. Just to create more sounds. Yeah, I'll stop there. All right, so I'm happy to do any Q&A. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. You actually already answered my first question, which was going to be, what do these plants sound like? So I'm really happy you gave this demo, because I was so curious. But to follow up on that, you know, based on your research of, you know, looking into many different indigenous knowledge systems and techniques and sonic systems and rituals and drumming and rhythms that go on, what I hear you saying there is that there are many really different ways of accessing or tuning to these other layers of reality. What do you need to do to prepare yourself to listen to plants, right? How can you understand, not only listen to the signal, but interpret in some way what they are saying to you? What have you found so far in that field?
Oh, that's a lovely question. I think, yeah, I think it's a very, I think when we think of things like spirituality and even like the idea of ayahuasca, I think that what I love about your question is, what does it take to get there? And I think it takes a lot of releasing of this modern world. I think it's really important, like things like meditation and Taoist ideas of emptying your cup. I think it's really important that we remove our clinging to forms that we're very well acquainted to, and be more embracing of things that just feel different, and really just be as open as possible to listen to just listen with no judgment. And that's why what I was saying with one of the last slides of this idea of language, and how language can really get in the way of our understanding of the world in a fully present way, because language, it's really just a container. And we can only understand the reality based off the words that we have if we are so reliant on language. And so I think it's really important to kind of just like try and release as much of these modern ideas of understanding as possible, and be just as embracing of everything around you without this judgment and container of what we're used to.
All right. Thank you. So that what you're saying is it really requires us to take the time to step out of language, right? Which is of course difficult, but there are techniques which listening to your whole presentation now, it really makes me wonder about this bridge back to the digital world, right? You seem to be emphasizing now what we could call natural intelligence instead of artificial intelligence, this deeply encoded knowledge and aliveness that is already in the world. And artificial intelligence is maybe just only mimicking a little bit of this, but there's so much to discover in the natural world. How do you interface back to the digital? I see you doing this in your modular synth, for example. But how does this translate for you back into the digital realm, or how do you interface with that?
Yeah. I think for me, it's just been so interesting as an artist and musician in this way, but then also as a technologist that's working so actively with AI and seeing the correlation. So yeah, there is this natural intelligence that I'm finding is, this is way more powerful than our limited idea of artificial intelligence, but also understanding that artificial intelligence is just one small spectrum of the natural intelligence that exists around us. Like artificial intelligence is just this replication of using the Western world's language and operating within these Western world symbols or systems. And so I think for me, what excites me a lot is to watch how AI is advancing in this way, but knowing that it's really just touching the surface of this idea of intelligence. And so what might happen if natural systems, natural forms of intelligence, indigenous understandings of the world, if models are created off of that, or if our idea of intelligence is expanded outside of what we can understand through our own cognitive activity, but through studying the ways that other sentient beings have their own form of cognitive activity.
All right. Any questions in the online space or from the people here in the room? If not, I have many more for you. I've in my own research on this in this field, both through experience and through reading, I've heard often this statement that deep down the whole world is composed of sound or frequencies or energy in some way. And when I hear your research here, it seems to be pointing to this idea that, we're all vibrations. There's going on, these frequencies that are going on. How do you relate to this idea of perhaps everything being alive and moving and vibrating?
Yeah, I think what I do, especially in the summer, in warmer weather when I can be on my roof, is just meditate a lot and just listen to the sounds around me, like listening to the birds, listening to the wind flowing in the trees. And if we think about that, for me, I just have so many theories around that, but even just this like natural world soundscape that exists within us. And it's not at a rhythm that we can understand through pop music, but this idea of like the natural rhythm, and how that just like being present within that is really something I love to do. But I think also the interesting thing with sound is in some of those slides of showing how there is the vibrational, like the physical vibration of sound that we hear, but there's also the visual representation of that physical that we can see, whether it's like if we have tools to translate that vibrational energy into visuals, and how also that correlates to the same maths that are designing the plants, flowers, and the movement of different planets. So I feel like for me, it's kind of like even with that idea of language, like let's push past this idea of language of sound is just a representation of energy in a way that we can hear. But it's also, if we think of sonic paintings or whatever it is, or sonic flowers, like it's really that same energy. It's using the same source and it's just manifesting it in a different way.
Just that our ears happen to capture a certain bandwidth of those frequencies, and eyes capture a different, but I guess you're right. It's the same. It's like a whole spectrum of energies. Interesting.
Exactly.
It's interesting. And then, I mean, you tap into this really big question here about consciousness, and I'd like to zoom out a little bit in the why of your practice. What are you trying to create or offer here for yourself or for others in terms of methods, or what would you like people to think or feel or experience when they're engaging with your work?
Yeah, such great questions. I think a lot about consciousness, because I think even with my art practice and my research, so much I think of what I'm trying to do is, I think we don't really understand how much our consciousness impacts the way that we feel and exist within this world. And so for me, I've been very focused on really trying to almost like sculpt a consciousness that allows me to feel as best as possible when I'm moving through this world. And I think when we think about, okay, like emotions are so much of they impact our consciousness, or they impact the way that we experience things or translate or understand things, and to understand what are your relationships to your emotions. Why might this action impact you in such a way that you now feel this, and understand that that's a story that you were telling yourself of someone did this to you, or you think they did that to you, and that makes you feel this way. And now you're a victim of this emotion, versus understanding, wait a minute, that's just a story I'm telling myself. I could be misunderstanding. I could look at it differently. I could operate from a different level of compassion. But if I can at least understand what is the story that I'm telling myself, like to ground this, maybe say that someone walks past you and bumps you, and now you feel really upset because you grew up feeling like everyone was always ignoring you and not listening to you as a kid. And so that triggers all these different emotions, versus understanding, wait, that person bumping me might have nothing to do with them not seeing me. They could just be in a rush. But also, why do I feel this way? Why do I feel like the world, might not care about my existence, or this or that? So I think I'm really just trying to transmute a lot of emotions, so that it's maybe a bit of like transcending my own humanity, of how can I design a way of thinking that really just allows me to be as present and accepting and compassionate to the world around me. And I think that's so much of what consciousness is.
Wow. And what I hear you saying here is that actually adjusting our consciousness is like using ourselves like a medium, or approaching ourselves as, malleable like a medium, that we can shift and change. There's not something fixed. But actually you have these technologies of consciousness like meditation or self-reflection that
Exactly.
we can actually also create ourselves.
Yeah, I love the idea. Exactly. The understanding of neuroplasticity, that your brain is not stuck the way that it is. It's simply a tool that has used the way that you have navigated in the world, and it's amalgamated all of that into what you exist with now. But you can change that whenever you want. You can look at the world completely differently. You can create new habits. You can create new talents just by repeatedly doing something and over again. So I think even like if I have certain kind of thoughts, I'll forgive myself for having different thoughts, but also be very attentive to restructuring my thoughts in different, it's really how can you understand that your brain is completely malleable. Your way of understanding your energy, all of that stuff is malleable. So how can you design it to be as optimal for you as possible?
All right. Amazing. I'm excited about this. We are coming to the end. I just want to make sure that I didn't miss any urgent questions here or online. Here's a question from the online space. You work between technologies, from natural to really synthetic mediums. How do you choose the mediums you work with?
Technology, for me, I'm very agnostic with technology. I think even like spirituality is a form of technology. Consciousness is a form of technology. And so it's never about the tool. It's more of what's the mission? What am I trying to do? What serves that mission best? And then finding technologies for that. So I came across this because friends just sent me a bunch of videos on this guy that was using sensors on his mushrooms and creating sound with it. And they knew that was something that I would be interested in. So sometimes it's not even like having an intention, but it's more of just like being fascinated with this combination of things. And for me, the idea of using energy from plants and also being someone that loves sound and being able to blend both of them, that just also started this whole rabbit hole of research. So it kind of goes both ways. But I think really what I'm trying to emphasize, it's never about the technology. It's more of, how is it best serving the purpose that I'm trying to do?
I think those are pretty amazing final words. I'd like a warm round of applause for Ari. I'm going to do a little recap. I just want to check in. Should I do that now, or should we going to take a break first? Now. Okay. I have the pleasure of weaving together some threads of the different 3 panels we've been listening to today. What are the themes emerging? What are the questions emerging? What are the patterns? And I'd really like to invite you to think along with me in our shared pad. We have a shared pad. So if you haven't looked at it, you can follow this QR code. It's full of notes. I must admit, most of them are mine from today. I listen through typing. But I invite you to scroll through this with me and look at the patterns that you see emerging when it comes to the main question of today. If we think of these different speakers as a with all due respect to their individual knowledge, but also as contributing to a collective compost heap of possibilities. What is possible? If they can do this, what else is possible? What are the things that excited you, that opened a door in your imagination, that made you think, oh, wow, this is really quite amazing? You can type it here, or you can speak it. What for me emerged today, looking at the first presentation with Nahuel Gerth, is this nature of code as the DNA of our world and something we can play with, this invitation to find the entry point to play with our bodies, and just reminding ourselves that technology can be used intuitively, right? And I just read it as a really big invitation to play. To play, right? To play with typography, to play with the spaces you're in, to play with your bodies, and to see that there's something quite serious going on there. Through your play, figuring out how things work, you're actually tapping into the source code of society, recreating, understanding how the world works. And what I also heard him say is inviting us to the speculative design methods to not only create things that work, that are solutions, but also create things that make us think, that invite people to look at the world differently. So this is a, do I do justice to your? Sounds awesome. All right, let's do that. Of course, my computer now is empty, so I'll have to do this very live. In the second presentation, we really had this opportunity to look through the digital world and the complexity of things through paper, understanding how the fold, the possibility of a physical interaction with the world actually gives us another way of understanding photography, cosmology, complex systems. Should I take this job or not? All sort of complex decision-making algorithms that actually can be materialized in a way that we can understand. So again, I hear the body coming back. This invitation to make things tangible, touchable, slappable. You can work with them. And it's not only somewhere in the code or in the cloud, but we carry things with us. And what I really appreciate in this is understanding also how quite complex puzzles can be solved through the intelligence of our bodies. Something there. And here in this last talk, I heard an invitation to not only look to our own bodies, to this intelligence, but also to more than human friends, plants, systems, and also other cultures in the world that have had ancient technologies of myth, music, of rhythm, that are probably holding secrets that are still relevant for us today. It can be very tempting in our times to only think of the latest new thing. But some technologies have been around for so long that we fail to recognize them as being relevant for now. So I hear this invitation to expand our consciousness, horizons, to historical, to other cultures, and to other beings. So I see this sort of spiraling out from the body to the world, to the wide, wide world. How's that for a recap? What struck you? Any last questions or comments before we round off for today? What seeds are planted in your garden? What ideas have opened for you? Anyone? Yeah, sure. Let's nice give the microphone back to the first speaker.
Yeah, just a quick thought from, I really liked in the last talk this idea, of attunement towards nature, like that she talked about oscillation. So we have I think the ability to attune or like to get ourselves in shared states of mind with other parts of nature. It could be animals, it could be plants, whatever. And I think that's that's a great field to explore. It holds many possibilities, can change our perspective, and I'd love to see more of that. So yeah, that's my thought on that. Yeah.
Thank you. And I really heard here another sort of reference back to Marshall McLuhan, who you quoted, to remind ourselves that technology includes things like fire, clothing, spoons, paper, things like that. Sometimes when we think about technology, we only think of things with a plug. Just to remind ourselves that a ayahuasca journey or a tree in the forest, or actually the whole forest and the ecosystem itself, are also complex systems and technologies, and our interfaces with them are way, way wilder than our little tiny screens or our other rectangles we might be using as an interface. We have time for drinks and networking, so do stick around if you're here. And for those online, feel free to link up with Creative Coding Utrecht, who is now in Rotterdam. Creative Coding Utrecht, Rotterdam. Any final words from the organizers before we close off?
Thank you. We have a whole thank you list. What? Oh, thank you, Shailoh, for the great moderation. Yeah. Yeah. And thank you all for joining. We'll keep the recordings online so you can see all of this back. Yeah, thank you, and have a nice rest of the day or evening or morning, wherever you are. Okay.